Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Ryzen 3 3100 is here. That is right, Zen 2, 7 nanometer, 4 core, 8 threads, 3.9 gigahertz on all the cores and threads, $99, at least in the United States. And for that price, it is unlocked, overclockable, and includes a cooler in the box. That's a pretty good deal, all things considered. So should you buy one? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Now, I'm using the backdrop of Ghost Recon Breakpoint and its benchmark and live gameplay to talk about this CPU. Not to worry, I have tested almost a dozen other games so far on this. I'll give you a couple of teasers and heads up on what to expect as we go. The actual finished video with all the benchmarks and everything isn't done as of recording this, and I'm recording this voiceover at 10 p.m. on May 6th, 2020, which is about a little less than 12 hours away from the launch. I've had the CPUs for 2 days. So I have not had enough time to do extensive benchmarking and comparison, to film a video and do a bunch of edit and put all that together. I'll have something more for you on the day of launch, but the full review with decent comparisons and tons of games tested and different graphics cards, I did test different graphics cards, we'll have to wait a couple of days because it does take time to put those together. I've done actually most of the testing using an RTX 2060, not the Super, the 2060 with 6 gigabytes. It's currently running $299 on Newegg, at least when this launches. And a $300 graphics card is probably all you should consider spending if you've got a $99 budget for your CPU. If you're going to buy something faster, if you're going to get a 2060 Super, 2070, 2080, etc., then you probably should be looking at the very least at the Ryzen 5 3600 rather than the Ryzen 3 3100. Just a little fun spoiler for you. Yes, I did retest the Ryzen 5 3600, and the full review will have some of those numbers in it. It does perform pretty well, all things considered, and the clock speed's a little bit faster on that as well, but that's not what today's video is about. Today's video is all about 4 cores and 8 threads. And looking at the game that we're testing right here, some of you are probably screaming at your monitor saying, Tech, have you lost the plot? You have a $1,200 video card installed on a $99 CPU. This is ridiculous. No one on earth, except for the 2 chuckleheads in the back, is going to install a 2080 Ti on a $99 CPU. You are correct. They are not, except again for the 2 chuckleheads in the back. The reason for that is to remove the graphics card as a limitation and allow us to get the, quote, pure performance of the CPU. It is worth noting that today's top-end graphics card is tomorrow's mid-range graphics card and is the day after tomorrow's entry-level graphics card. Although the day after tomorrow may actually end up being like, 5 years from now or more. However, if you go back 5 years ago, the GTX 980 Ti was top dog. And today they can be had for $150 or so. So 5 years from now, you might very well be able to find RTX 2080 Ti's for under $200. And if you buy a Ryzen 3 3100, one question you might ask is, if you upgrade your graphics card over the next few years and keep your CPU, what's it physically capable of when given plenty of graphics? And you're watching it, because this test right here is completely and totally CPU bound. The graphics card is not running at 100%. We are at 1080p ultra detail, and the graphics card is loafing at about 65 to 75% depending upon the scene, and so we're CPU bound. Now, whenever I say things like that, I inevitably get comments in the comment section below where people say, I don't understand. How are you CPU bound? Your CPU's not at 100%, so you can't possibly be CPU bound. I get that comment so often, I'm just addressing it right now. And for anybody who leaves that comment below, well, we know you didn't watch the video now, don't we? In any case, the only way you will ever reach 100% usage, at least the way it's reported in MSI Afterburner, is if all the cores and all the threads are 100% utilized. That's virtually never going to happen in a game. Only in synthetic workloads, only like running Blender or 7-zip or video encoding or a few other things, are you ever going to reach truly 100% usage. And especially so on a CPU that has hyperthreading, or excuse me, in this case, SMT, symmetrical multithreading, because hyperthreading is an Intel trademark term, but we'll call it hyperthreading because that's what everybody knows it is. Without hyperthreading, it's much easier for games to hit 100% usage, but with hyperthreading, the extra threads allow the scheduler to prefetch data, to load data, to run instructions out of order. It smooths the delivery of executed instructions and results of all those instructions and allows the game to run smoother. Hyperthreading rarely adds much performance. Sometimes it gives you anywhere between 5 to 10% more performance. Of course, Intel would tell you in their most optimum conditions, with all the stars aligned and all the galaxies aligned and all the universes aligned and all the, I don't know, everybody singing Kumbaya, you can potentially get 30 to 40% more performance with hyperthreading enabled. That's virtually never true. It's usually 5 to 10% more performance. However, you don't use hyperthreading for more performance. You use hyperthreading for smoother performance. And smoother is something that, unfortunately, a frame rate chart rarely is going to show. I know we have 1% and 0.1% lows, but those don't really tell the whole tale. Now, if you watch the real-time performance on the screen, you'll see that we have a frame time chart. We're currently at 10.4, 9.9, 12. It jumped up. There's 12 milliseconds. That is the time, the number of milliseconds between each frame. Think of it this way. If you had perfectly smooth frame delivery and you were running a smooth 60 frames per second, there would be 16.6 milliseconds between every frame. The less time between the frames, the higher your frame rate. However, numbers on a chart and averages and even 1% lows only give you a single data point. They don't indicate how smoothly the frames were delivered. They don't indicate how many times there was a stutter jump or a jump up to, say, 30 milliseconds where the frame rate dropped down to maybe 30 frames per second, but only for like 2 frames, and then it went back to normal. In a normal benchmark, those don't show up very well. Even 1% lows aren't going to show that because across the course of 20 or 30 minutes of live gameplay, and I actually ended up playing for 27 minutes here, across that much time, a single frame here and there, a couple of frames, a couple of dips won't even be shown in a 1% low number. But they will be shown in a real-time graph that gives you a running idea of how smooth the game is. Smoothness is a relative term. This was completely playable. I didn't have any problem whatsoever running around, grabbing things, shooting things. As you saw, I had a terrible flight in the helicopter because I got shot down by a missile, but whatever, it doesn't matter. We survived, which is utterly absurd. It was at the beginning, and I was doing the intro, so I couldn't talk about it, but yeah, go back and watch the intro again. It's utterly silly. Here we are driving around, and it's smooth. Well, it is and it isn't. A couple of things I want you to keep in mind. You are watching a recording of a live gameplay, and you're watching that recording on your computer being streamed over the internet. This video was not recorded capturing every frame. Let me say that again, because I think that's one of those details that gets overlooked when you watch this stuff. When I captured this, the capture was capturing at 60 frames per second, and it was capturing whatever the display was outputting every 16.6 milliseconds. It is not capturing all the frames. We are currently, as I'm speaking, we have a rolling average of 82 frames per second. The 4 white numbers on the screen on MS Afterburner, the leftmost number is the real-time performance. The second most left number is the rolling average from when I hit F9 to start benchmarking to this moment. That's the running average across the gameplay we've done so far. The 58 is the rolling 1% low, and the 45 is the rolling 0.1% low. Now, those will change and shift a little bit over time, and in fact, none of those are actually the final numbers, although they're kind of in the ballpark if you just want to see the chart, skip to the end. I do have a comparison, by the way, at the end of this video between the built-in benchmark and live gameplay, and I'll leave it up to you as to whether or not you think, quote, this gameplay is representative of the game. I mean, you can pick anywhere in the game to play, you can pick different activities that's going to affect the performance. Spoiler alert, there's a fairly large average performance difference between the live gameplay and the built-in benchmark. So that brings us back to the video capture device. My external hardware capture device is capturing on a separate computer. There's no performance lost. It's capturing 60 frames per second, which means as I'm saying this, 23 frames per second are lost. you can't see them because they were never recorded. And because they were never recorded, you can't watch them on YouTube. But even if I turned up the frame rate on my capture card, I could hook up a higher speed monitor on the pass-through. I could turn up the capture rate. We're playing at 1080p. My 4K hardware capture card will actually capture at 1080p 240 frames per second. So why don't you do that? If you do that, then we could watch it and then it'd be awesome. YouTube doesn't support 240 frames per second. YouTube only supports 60 frames per second. So even if I captured all the frames, it wouldn't record them. And it's actually even trickier than that, although 240 might actually capture them all given the disparity. The capture card is not capturing as the frames are refreshed. The capture card is capturing a frame every 16.6 milliseconds. Sometimes it'll be midway through a frame. Sometimes it will be, it'll miss a frame, but which frame it misses is going to change. It might capture 3 frames in a row and miss the 4th. Capture 3 more frames, miss the 4th. Then it'll capture 2, miss 1, capture 3, miss 1, etc. And you are watching this being streamed over the internet in the form of a video. You aren't watching it live on a monitor and you aren't controlling it, so your hands aren't on the keyboard to feel the input lag between when you press the buttons and when things actually happen. So what's the solution to this? Well, there isn't one. You're not in front of the computer, you're watching a recording. And because you're limited to what YouTube can provide, this is the best we can do. When you hear me give you my thoughts and feedback on the playability, the input lag, the responsiveness of a game, unfortunately, you just kind of have to take my word for it at some point, and you have to do so because there's no way I can actually demonstrate it because your hands aren't on the keyboard and you're not watching the monitor as the game's being played. Even if I recorded the monitor with a camera, if I record the monitor with a 4K 60 frame per second camera and then uploaded at 4K 60 frames per second to YouTube, the camera is only recording a frame off the monitor every 16.6 milliseconds. It's not recording all the frames. So, yeah, there's just... you gotta take my word for it. And speaking of words for it, what exactly am I talking about? Well, let me make this pretty simple and straightforward. This is playable. This is fine. If this is all you have and this is all you've experienced and this is what you're used to, this is fine. It's controllable. You could play the entire game this way. It's not bad. I have played Ghost Recon Breakpoint on much faster computers. Ryzen 7 3700X, Ryzen 9 3900X, i9 9900K at 5 GHz. The average frame rate on those faster CPUs will be faster than this. Not monstrously so, but they will be faster than this. However, the biggest single difference is in the overall smoothness of the game, the smoothness of the controls, and the fact that when you press the fire button, your character fires just a little bit faster on the faster CPUs, especially with more cores. Ghost Recon Breakpoint will absolutely use 8 real cores. And in fact, the usage will go over 50% on an 8-core 16-thread chip. So it'll use all 8 cores and then some of the hyper-threading on top of that because, well, it does that. And it certainly will. A lot of new games are starting to do that. The Division 2 will use 8 cores. It'll actually use more than 8 cores. Shadow of the Tomb Raider will use 8 cores. There are a number of new games that are now doing that. And of course, the new consoles haven't even launched yet that have 8-core 16-thread Zen 2 CPUs, basically a customized version of the Ryzen 7 3700X. So if you want to play games like Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Division 2, Cyberpunk 2077, Watch Dogs Legion, Red Dead Redemption 2, this is not the CPU for you. And in fact, if you're running any of the 4-core 8-thread chips, an i7 4790K, an i7 4770K, a 2600K, even the best Intel ever did, which is the i7 7700K. If these are the kind of games you want to play, seriously, you are due for an upgrade. Yes, they're playable. Yes, they function. But once you've gotten an 8-core 16-thread CPU, or better, get yourself a Ryzen 9 3900X, you're going to go, well, that's interesting. It's a little bit faster, but holy smokes, it's butter smooth. Unless, of course, you're one of those people who just doesn't care, in which case you'll say, what are you talking about, Tech? I don't see any difference. There are a few people, in fairness, who have said, man, I upgraded and I was kind of underwhelmed. I have gotten far, far more comments from people who have said, wow, the videos and the benchmarks don't do it justice. I just did a video the other day. I had 2 different people reply within an hour. One of them actually did upgrade from an i7 4790K to a Ryzen 7 3700X. And he's like, you know, it's, you don't know what you're not missing until you have it. And then you go, how did I ever live with my old CPU? It's smoother, it's more responsive. The whole machine just feels a generation ahead. And the i7 4790K is a good chip. Up to 4.4 gigahertz out of the box, 4 gigahertz all-core turbo, good IPC, good memory support, even NVMe drive support. Many of the Z97 motherboards have an M.2 slot. I have an NVMe drive on my 4790K. And it seems fine. And if you're playing Overwatch and League of Legends and CSGO and Rainbow Six Siege and Grand Theft Auto 5, no, there's no reason to upgrade. I mean, if those are the games you're playing, a 4790K is great. Keep it. Don't change. I wouldn't change. But if you want to play these kinds of games, you're absolutely, positively 100. You're probably a year late in upgrading, to be completely honest. Zen 2 would have been perfect to purchase at launch, or even in 2018, the i9 9900K, which isn't cheap, mind you, but it'll last a number of years, and it's just, it is a mile ahead of a 4790K when it comes to responsiveness in the kinds of games such as this that will use 8 cores, and it's a more modern platform with DDR4 and a faster DMI and a faster bus speed and more modern instruction sets in the CPU. There's been a number of instructions added which are slowly starting to be used. It makes a difference. It doesn't mean that the old CPUs are unplayable, but if you're a premium consumer and you're the kind of person who bought an i7 in the first place 5, 6, 7 years ago, then you may not realize it, but you kind of got run over by this new stuff in the past couple of years. 4 cores was good once upon a time, but for this stuff, that day is well and truly over. And here is the built-in benchmark to show you the difference, except as I'm voicing this over, I notice a small minor mistake on my part, but hey, I'm showing you because transparency and honesty in testing. I do try to not make mistakes, but I am, however, human, so sue me. I apologize. You can have a full refund for all the $0 you paid to watch this video. I ran the live gameplay using DirectX 11, and the built-in benchmark was run using Vulkan, which makes the results pretty meaningless. I acknowledge that. Unfortunately, I don't have this video card on this test bench at the moment. In fact, I don't even have the CPU on there at the moment. The Ryzen 5 3600 is on there, and I am finishing this voiceover at about 11 o'clock the night before the videos need to go up. So I don't have time to go upstairs and reconfigure the benchmark and put it back in this configuration and retest it using DirectX 11 to show you the difference. So this is what you're getting. I keep meaning to do a detailed comparison between Vulkan and DirectX 11 and DirectX 12, and I haven't yet. My apologies. Vulkan's a little bit faster in many cases, not always tremendously so. The performance gap you're about to see here is partly Vulkan, but it's also partly the game. I've done enough of this, and I've played, 60 hours in this game at this point. I mean, it is faster in the benchmark than it is in live gameplay in general, but the Vulkan's helping a little bit. So some of the differences because of that. So I'm showing you this in the interest, because if I just show you the chart with the results, and I don't tell you, hey, you know, one was Vulkan, one was DirectX 11, well, that's dishonest. So I'm not going to do that. If I screw up and make a mistake, I'm going to tell you. And as I said, I just don't have time to reconfigure it before I have to do something with this. So what can I say? Just leave a comment below to remind me to do that, or send me a message over on the Tech Deals Discord, and one of these days I'll do it. 84 frames per second average in live gameplay, DirectX 11 versus 107 in the built-in benchmark using Vulkan. Yeah, I know those results are kind of pointless because of the different... well, you have 2 results. What can I say? The RTX 2080 Ti was definitely bottlenecked. Now, one big difference here is this was ultra detail. I rarely benchmark ultra detail. I usually do high detail. And that's the only reason the graphics card was being used as much as it was. Lower it to 1080p high detail and we'd be at like 40 to 50%. But because we had a 2080 Ti, I went ahead and did ultra detail just because, it's 1080p, why not? We'll do that. Plays nicely. Detail settings don't really affect the input lag and the stutters that you saw in there at various points. It's good, but let's be honest. If you want to play AAA games, the Ryzen, preferably Ryzen 9 is your best friend, but at the very least the Ryzen 7. And if you're on a super tight budget, I wouldn't go 1 foot below the Ryzen 5 3600 if you want to play games like Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Cyberpunk 2077, etc. 4 cores and 8 threads is for budget gaming, for esports gaming, for casual gaming, Sims 4, Minecraft, Roblox, Terraria, CSGO, Overwatch. Even Fortnite's fine on one of these, but it's definitely not for this. Some of you may have noticed that this is the World of Tanks Encore 2.0 Ray Traced benchmark. This is 1080p ultra detail with ray tracing off. Not on, off. Why? Well, so I can do a future comparison with the RX 5700, because if I turn ray tracing on here, it kind of screws that up. Although ray tracing doesn't really take a lot of performance off of here because World of Tanks only uses it for shadows. I'm not putting this in here to do a big benchmark thing on it. This is a bonus for those of you, instead of 2 gold stars, you get a bonus benchmark for those of you who stuck around to the 20-minute mark of this ridiculously long video. A lot of questions hopefully got answered in this video that I get asked all the time on my main video, so maybe if you watch this and other people ask questions, you can point them to this video. This would be a great video to share if you say, look, if you want to deep dive into the performance options of different CPUs and core counts and when it matters and when it doesn't, go watch this 20-something minute video from Tech Deals. It'll take a while, but if you want a deep discussion of it, well, it's a good place to go get a nice discussion, and there's a bonus benchmark at the end for all of you. Now at 1080p ultra detail, notice that we are currently averaging 174 frames per second. We have a 104 frame per second, 0.1% low. That is spectacular. Now this is obviously a benchmark, not live gameplay. There's going to be times it's going to be lower than that in live gameplay, but the point is, I changed the video card. This is an RTX 2060 with 6 gigs of VRAM and a $99 CPU. And look at the CPU usage. We're not even at 50%. We're using, okay, we touched 49% there. But the point is, it runs very well, all things considered. I promised you a second gold star, and you've got one. I'm going to teach everybody to watch my whole videos if it kills me. This is Shadow of the Tomb Raider Ryzen 3 3300X. Notice the difference. We were on the 3100X on the first two. Bonus, you can see the clock speed here. We are at 4.35 gigahertz versus 3.9. That is 450 megahertz faster. This is running at stock clock speeds, 1080p, highest detail, RTX 2060, and that is a pretty darn good frame rate. Now, DLSS is on, and of course some people are going to say, well, that's cheating. Well, yeah, okay, sure, fine, whatever. I don't think it's cheating, but that's me. I think if the checkbox is there, I think you should be able to use it. I do think the VRAM usage is impressive. Notice we're using nearly 6 gigabytes of VRAM at 1080p. 6 gigabytes is pushing it, but you can lower it to high detail, and it will certainly use less VRAM, lower the textures by 1 notch. It'll be just fine. Pretty smooth right here, but it's rough in places. Notice that 0.1% load dipped way down there in the transition, but it's a built-in benchmark. What can you expect? All things considered, these aren't bad CPUs, but if in my final analysis I would say buy a Ryzen 5 3600 if you can all avoid it. It'll actually be about 200 megahertz slower than the 3300X and about 200 megahertz faster than the 3100. It'll also be about $55 more than this 3300X right here. But with 6 cores and 12 threads, I really do believe it's a better long-term value. And only people on the most extreme of budgets should be buying a Ryzen 3, to be completely honest with you. Buy the Ryzen 5. The extra 2 cores gives you 50% more cores, 50% more threads, basically the same clock speed. For $55 more than the cost of a 3300X, it's going to last you more years and just give you a smoother gameplay experience. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you love it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, suggestions, you know where the comment section is. I look forward to seeing all of you down in the comment section going, I got my 2 gold stars because I watched to the end and I saw the 2 bonus benchmarks which aren't mentioned in the thumbnail or in, I guess, at the beginning of the video, because I wasn't planning on putting them here. I added these when I was finished voicing over the video, and I was like, yeah, we need to put something else in here. So bonus for all of you. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing all of you in the next video.